Hey, everyone. I'm Clara, and today I'm going to share a story that, honestly, I never thought I'd be telling. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the Disturbing Stories channel for more stories like this, and don't forget to hit the like button and share it with that friend who loves a good suspense. What I went through was real and terrifying, and I hope that by hearing my account, you can learn from my mistakes and maybe avoid falling into a trap like the one that ensnared me. Let's start from the beginning, where everything seemed normal, until it wasn't. When Lucas suggested that we have an open relationship, I was taken aback. We had been together for almost 2 years, and I always thought our relationship was solid, built on trust and love. However, Lucas started talking about wanting to experience more freedom, to explore new connections without ceasing to love me. At first, I resisted. I'm not a jealous person, but the idea of sharing Lucas with someone else deeply bothered me. But over time, I started to convince myself that maybe I was being possessive, old-fashioned. I didn't want to lose Lucas, so against my instincts, I agreed. At first, it didn't seem so bad. Lucas seemed happier, and that gave me a false sense of security. I didn't know it, but I was deluding myself. The first few weeks were different, but bearable. I tried not to think too much about the nights when Lucas would go out, saying he was meeting up with other people. I kept myself busy with work, with my hobbies, trying to ignore that growing sense of discomfort inside me. But then, something started to change. Small things in my house began to seem out of place. At first, I thought it was just me being distracted. A glass that I swore I left on the kitchen table would appear in the bathroom. My keys would go missing and then reappear in strange places. However, what bothered me most was the feeling of being watched. Sometimes, when I was alone at home, I had the distinct impression that someone was there, standing, staring at me. I would look around, but I never found anything. It was during this time that Lucas began talking about a new friend, Sabrina. He met her at one of those meetups, and they quickly became very close. At first, I tried to ignore the jealousy, telling myself it was natural for him to make new friends. But there was something about Sabrina that deeply unsettled me. Lucas spoke of her with such enthusiasm, such admiration, that I started to feel more and more excluded from his life. She began coming over to our house more often, and whenever she was around, I felt a heaviness in the air, a sense that something was very wrong. Things started to get worse when I began having recurring nightmares. In the dream, I was always in a dark place, surrounded by shadows that whispered incomprehensible words. I saw strange symbols, hooded figures performing bizarre rituals, and at the center of it all was Sabrina. She looked at me with a cold smile, and I felt like I was trapped in a snare from which I couldn't escape. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. Even when awake, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was pursuing me, tormenting me. Then, one night, something even more terrifying happened. Lucas had gone out to meet Sabrina, and I was home alone. It was late, and I was trying to sleep when I heard a noise coming from the hallway. It sounded like someone was walking through the house. My first instinct was to call for Lucas, but I remembered he wasn't there. Fear gripped me, but I knew I had to check what was happening. I grabbed my phone to use as a flashlight and headed to the hallway. When I reached the living room, the air was cold, and a chill ran down my spine. In the center of the room, there was a circle drawn on the floor with symbols I had never seen before. In the middle of the circle was a photo of me and Lucas, and the edges of the photo were burned. I was paralyzed with fear, not knowing what to do. This couldn't be a coincidence. Someone had done this, and I knew it had something to do with Sabrina. I called Lucas, but he didn't answer. I sat on the couch, staring at the circle on the floor, trying to make sense of what was happening. When Lucas finally came home, hours later, I told him what I had found. He didn't seem surprised, he just said it must be some stupid prank. But I knew it wasn't. There was something much darker going on, and Lucas was involved in it, even if he didn't want to admit it. In the days that followed, my situation only got worse. I started having constant headaches, and my energy was drained. I couldn't focus at work, and the nightmares kept haunting me. Lucas grew more distant, spending more time with Sabrina than with me. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know where to start. So, in a moment of desperation, I decided to seek help. I went to an esoteric shop in the city center. There, I met a woman named Mrs. Lord. She was known for her knowledge of the occult and for helping people who were going through strange situations like mine. I told her everything that was happening, and she listened attentively, without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at me seriously and said that I had been the victim of witchcraft. Mrs. Lord explained that Sabrina was not an ordinary person. She was using magic to interfere with my life and my relationship with Lucas. The circle I found in the living room was part of a ritual Sabrina had performed to weaken me and drive Lucas away from me. The nightmares, the feeling of being watched, it was all a consequence of this spell. She told me that the only way to break free from this influence was to sever ties with Lucas completely and perform a protection ritual. It was the only way to cut the bonds Sabrina had created and protect myself from the dark forces she was invoking. However, there was a price to pay. For the ritual to work, I would have to distance myself from Lucas entirely, even if it meant never seeing him again. I was devastated. I still loved Lucas, but I knew I had to protect myself. I decided to follow Mrs. Lord's instructions and perform the ritual. That night, I prepared everything as she had taught me. I lit the candles, recited the words of protection, and made a circle around myself with salt, as she had instructed. During the ritual, I felt a strong presence, almost tangible, as if something was trying to stop me. But I continued to the end, determined to rid myself of this curse. After the ritual, something inside me changed. I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in months, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But I knew I couldn't stop there. The next day, I made the hardest decision of my life. I broke up with Lucas. When I told Lucas about my decision, he was furious. He accused me of being influenced by superstitions and called me crazy. But I knew I was doing the right thing. I needed to protect myself, and staying with him would mean remaining under Sabrina's influence and the forces she was invoking. Lucas left, and with him, the darkness that seemed to follow me also dissipated. In the days that followed, things started to return to normal. The nightmares stopped, and the feeling of being watched disappeared. But even so, I knew Sabrina was still out there, and I couldn't let my guard down. Life moved on, and I began to recover from what had happened. But then, one night, something unexpected occurred. When I came home from work, I found a package left at my door. There was no sender, no identification of any kind. With my heart racing, I opened the package and found a rag doll. The doll was crudely made, but it had features that closely resembled mine. Attached to the doll was a handwritten note, "This isn't over." My blood ran cold. Sabrina was still out there, and I knew she wouldn't give up easily. But now, I was prepared. I was no longer the person who had agreed to an open relationship to please someone else. I had learned to protect myself and not to let anyone invade my space and peace. If I could go back in time, I would never have accepted that open relationship. I would have refused Lucas's proposal and kept the boundaries that I always knew were essential for a healthy relationship. But now, there was no point in regretting the past. What mattered was what I would do from now on. I knew I couldn't just ignore that threat. Sabrina was dangerous, and I couldn't underestimate her. So, I went back to Mrs. Lord's shop, bringing the doll and the message with me. When Mrs. Lord saw the doll, her face darkened. "This is a warning," she said. "Sabrina won't stop until she gets what she wants." Mrs. Lord explained that the doll was a type of spell known as a curse doll, used to cause pain and suffering to the person it represents. But, fortunately, there was a way to neutralize the spell. We needed to perform a more powerful ritual, one that would not only protect me, but also send the negative energy back to whoever cast it. It was risky, but I had no other option. We decided to perform the ritual that very night. Mrs. Lord prepared everything carefully. The ritual required total concentration and a deep connection with the forces of nature. When night fell, we were ready. In Mrs. Lord's shop, surrounded by candles and protective symbols, I prepared myself to face whatever was coming. As Mrs. Lourdes recited the ritual's words, I held the doll and felt a strange energy emanating from it, as if it were alive. As the ritual progressed, the environment around us seemed to change. The shadows on the walls appeared to move, and the air became thick, almost suffocating. But I remained steady, focused on what needed to be done. At the height of the ritual, Mrs. Lourdes made a cut in the doll with a silver blade and poured a few drops of a special mixture she had prepared. Instantly, I felt a wave of heat rush through my body, followed by a sense of lightness, as if a massive weight had been lifted from me. The doll began to burn on its own, without any visible fire. Within minutes, it had turned to ashes. When the ritual ended, Mrs. Lourdes looked at me with a mix of relief and concern. "The spell is broken," she said. "But you must continue to protect yourself. Sabrina is powerful, and she may try something again. Never let your guard down." I thanked Mrs. Lourdes for everything and went home with a renewed sense of hope. I knew the battle wasn't entirely over, but for the first time, I felt like I had control over my own life again. I continued to follow Mrs. Lourdes' guidance, maintaining protection rituals in my home and strengthening my spirit with daily meditations and prayers. Months passed, and gradually, Sabrina's shadow receded from my life. I heard no more from her or Lucas, and I slowly managed to rebuild my life. I learned to trust myself more, value my peace, and set healthy boundaries in all my relationships. But even with time, that experience left scars. Sometimes, I still wake up in the middle of the night, feeling as if something is wrong. And whenever that happens, I get up, light a candle, and recite the words Mrs. Lourdes taught me. Because I know that somewhere, Sabrina might still be out there, waiting for an opportunity to return. But now, I'm prepared. And if she tries, I'll be ready to face her again. That's my story. If you've been through something similar or know someone who has, share your story with us to be featured on this channel. You'll remain anonymous. Share this video, and don't forget to subscribe to Disturbing Stories for more chilling tales like this. Leave a like, and take care. Evil can be anywhere, and the best defense is never underestimating the power of shadows. Until next time.